The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers opened with a sound like thunder rolling across distant mountains. Ambassador Thomas Reed stepped into the vast space, his boots clicking against polished stone that had been quarried from the homeworld of the extinct Vorthon civilization. Above him, the ceiling stretched so high it disappeared into artificial clouds, while around him representatives from 417 different species watched his every movement. Reed had expected intimidation. The council chamber was designed for it. Each alien representative sat in elevated positions that towered over the central speaking area, creating the impression that whoever stood in the middle was surrounded by gods sitting in judgment. The hegemony chancellor, a creature that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a spider, occupied the highest throne. Its compound eyes reflected the chamber's blue light as it clicked mandibles that could easily bite through titanium. What Reed had not expected was the silence. Complete absolute silence from beings who normally conducted their sessions in a cacophony of clicks, whistles, roars, and electronic translations. 417 species, representing trillions of citizens across the galaxy, were waiting to hear what one human had to say. Ambassador Reed of the species human, representing the planet Earth, Chancellor Vrex announced, his voice amplified by technology that made it seem to come from everywhere at once. You stand before this council charged with crimes against galactic peace. Reed remained perfectly still in the center of the chamber, his hands clasped behind his back. Behind him, his small diplomatic team stood in formation. Dr. Lisa Warren, the xenobiologist who had first made contact with galactic civilization, General Frank Stone, Earth's top military strategist, and Dr. Amy Chen, a physicist who understood technology that most humans could barely imagine. The charges, continued Chancellor Vrex, are as follows. First, interference in sovereign conflicts between member species. Second, disruption of established galactic order. Third, implementation of unauthorized conflict resolution. Protocols resulting in the immediate cessation of the 1,000-year war between the Corvani Empire and the Zelith Republic. A murmur rippled through the observer galleries. The 1,000-year war had been a constant in galactic politics for so long that most species had built their entire diplomatic strategies around its existence. Trade routes, alliance structures, military budgets, even cultural exchanges had all been shaped by the reality of two major powers locked in eternal conflict. Fourth, Vrex's voice cut through the murmur like a blade, unauthorized analysis of galactic military capabilities, resulting in the publication of theoretical scenarios that have caused widespread panic among member civilizations. Reed finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite the lack of amplification. Chancellor Vrex, honorable council members, I request permission to respond to these charges. Permission granted, Vrex replied, though his mandibles clicked with what humans had learned to recognize as displeasure. Reed stepped forward, moving closer to the elevated thrones. The movement caused several representatives to shift nervously in their seats. Your honors, before I address the specific charges, I believe the Council should understand exactly what happened when Earth first encountered galactic civilization. Dr. Warren activated a small holographic projector, filling the center of the chamber with an image of Earth as seen from space. The blue and green world rotated slowly, showing continents, oceans, and the thin wisps of clouds that marked it as a living planet. 6 months ago, Reed continued, Dr. Warren made first contact with a Zelith exploration vessel in our solar system. The Zelith captain, Commander Yala, was investigating what your databases had classified as a primitive pre-spaceflight civilization. The hologram shifted to show technical readouts, population statistics, and energy signatures that had been gathered during that first contact. Commander Yala was surprised to discover that Earth's population was not the expected few million primitive beings, but rather 8 billion technologically advanced humans. More surprising was our reaction to learning about galactic civilization. General Stone stepped forward. Most species, when first contacted by galactic civilization, request immediate membership, technology transfers, or military protection. Humans asked for one thing: complete records of all ongoing conflicts in the galaxy. The silence in the chamber deepened. Even the constant background hum of translation matrices seemed to pause. Within 72 hours of receiving those records, Reed continued, human analysts had identified 17 different conflicts that could be resolved immediately. 31 that could be resolved within one standard galactic year, and 8 that posed existential threats to galactic civilization. Chancellor Vrex leaned forward in his throne. Explain what you mean by existential threats. Dr. Chen activated additional holographic displays showing mathematical projections, resource flow analyses, and population dynamics. Your Honor, human analysis revealed that several ongoing conflicts were approaching cascade failure points. The 1,000-year war between the Corvani and Zelith was actually destabilizing the entire Outer Rim. Within 50 years, the economic disruption would have triggered a collapse affecting 47 different star systems. Impossible, interjected Counselor Thane, her crystalline form shimmering with agitation. Our economic models show no such instability. Reed smiled, an expression that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than friendly. Counselor Thane, your economic models assume that conflicts remain static. They don't account for evolutionary pressure. Evolutionary pressure? Vrex's mandibles clicked rapidly. Chancellor, the Corvani-Zelith conflict had become comfortable. Both sides had developed military-industrial complexes that benefited from continuous warfare without decisive victories. But conflicts don't remain static. They evolve, and this particular conflict was evolving toward total war. General Stone manipulated the holographic display to show fleet movements, resource allocation, and technological development curves. Within 2 generations, both empires would have developed weapons capable of rendering entire star systems uninhabitable. The psychological pressure of such capabilities would have made the conflict impossible to contain. And you ended this in a single day, Vrex stated. We ended it, Reed confirmed, by showing both sides exactly what they were approaching. We presented them with detailed projections of what their conflict would look like if it continued to its logical conclusion. The hologram now showed cascading destruction scenarios, refugee crisis models, and economic collapse projections that made several council members visibly recoil. The mathematical certainty of mutual annihilation, Dr. Warren explained, convinced both empires to seek immediate peace rather than continue down a path that led to their mutual destruction. Counselor Thane's form flickered with uncertainty. And the other 16 conflicts you claim to have resolved? Reed's expression grew serious. We haven't resolved them yet, Counselor. We've simply identified the solutions. But before we proceed, we wanted to discuss the matter with this council. Discuss what matter? Vrex demanded. Reed looked directly at the Chancellor, his gaze steady and unflinching. Whether the galaxy wants to learn why humans became so good at ending wars. The chamber erupted in confused chatter from dozens of different species. Translation matrices worked overtime to process the sudden cacophony of clicks, roars, whistles, and electronic communications. Chancellor Vrex pounded his ceremonial staff against his throne's armrest, the sound echoing through the chamber like gunshots. Silence. Ambassador Reed, explain yourself. Reed waited for complete quiet before responding. Chancellor, humans didn't develop our understanding of warfare through academic study. We developed it through necessity. For most of our evolutionary history, we were very good at destroying each other. He paused, letting the implications settle over the assembled representatives. Tomorrow, Your Honors, we'll explain exactly how good we were and why that makes us the galaxy's best hope for lasting peace. The second day of testimony brought a change in atmosphere to the Galactic Council chambers. Where yesterday had been marked by curiosity and confusion, today carried an undercurrent of genuine fear. Word had spread through the diplomatic quarters about the humans' claims, and representatives who had initially viewed the proceedings as entertainment now recognized they might be witnessing something that would reshape galactic civilization. Ambassador Reed entered the chamber with the same calm confidence as before, but his team had changed. Dr. Warren and Dr. Chen were absent, replaced by 2 individuals who carried themselves with unmistakable military bearing. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Earth's specialist in interplanetary conflict theory, and Dr. Robert Hayes, a psychologist whose area of expertise was what humans called war trauma. Chancellor Vrex wasted no time on formalities. Ambassador Reed, yesterday you claimed that humans developed their understanding of warfare through necessity. You promised to explain exactly what that means. This council demands that explanation. Reed nodded to Colonel Mitchell, who activated a holographic projector. The image that appeared in the center of the chamber was Earth, but not the peaceful blue and green world they had seen yesterday. This Earth was brown and gray, with angry red spots scattered across its surface. "This is Earth as it appeared 150 years ago," Reed began. "The red indicators mark active conflict zones. At this point in our history, approximately 40% of our planet's surface was experiencing some form of organized violence." A shocked murmur rippled through the observer galleries. Counselor Thane's crystalline form flickered with disbelief. 40%? How is such a thing possible on a single world? Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of professional experience. "Counselor, humans are a remarkably resourceful species when it comes to finding reasons to fight each other. Territory, resources, ideology, religion, ethnicity, economic systems. During this period, we had divided our single world into nearly 200 separate nations, many of which maintained permanent states of hostility with their neighbors." The hologram shifted to show population statistics, casualty counts, and resource expenditure data. Numbers scrolled past that made even the battle-hardened representatives of warrior species lean back in their seats. "In the century we're examining, Dr. Hayes added, human warfare resulted in approximately 108 million deaths. This represents roughly 5% of our total population during that period." Chancellor Vrex's mandibles clicked rapidly. 108 million casualties in a single century? From a pre-spaceflight civilization? "That number, Chancellor, represents what we learned to call restrained warfare," Reed replied grimly. "Conflicts conducted with unconscious limitations, cultural taboos, and moral barriers that prevented total escalation." The hologram now showed weapon development timelines, technological advancement curves, and tactical evolution patterns. "But human warfare didn't remain static," Colonel Mitchell continued. "It evolved. Each conflict taught us new methods of destruction, more efficient ways to eliminate enemies, better strategies for achieving victory. The evolution culminated in what we call our global wars," Dr. Barr Hayes explained. "Conflicts that engaged our entire species, utilizing every available resource and technology in pursuit of total victory." The numbers that appeared next to the hologram defied comprehension. 75 million casualties in the Second Global War alone. Industrial production redirected entirely to weapons manufacturing. Civilian populations deliberately targeted as strategic assets. Counselor Thane's form had become barely visible. "How did your species survive such devastation?" Reed's expression darkened. "We survived, Counselor, because we learned something that no other species in this galaxy has had to learn. We learned exactly what total warfare costs." The hologram shifted again, showing the development of nuclear weapons, the destruction of cities, and the psychological impact on civilian populations. "During our Second Global War, humans developed weapons capable of destroying entire urban centers in single attacks. We used them. The psychological shock was so severe that it ended the conflict immediately," Colonel Mitchell continued. "For the first time in human history, our leaders truly understood what they were risking. But understanding the cost didn't eliminate our capacity for warfare," Dr. Hayes added. "It refined it. We developed what we called deterrence theory, the maintenance of peace through the threat of unacceptable destruction." The hologram now showed Earth bristling with thousands of nuclear weapons, their potential blast radii overlapping until the entire planet seemed covered in circles of destruction. At the peak of what we called the Cold War, humans possessed approximately 60,000 nuclear weapons with a combined yield capable of destroying our civilization multiple times over. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Even the translation matrices seemed to process the information with difficulty. Chancellor Vrex spoke slowly, his voice carrying a tremor that had not been present the day before. "And this taught your species peace?" Reed shook his head. "No, Chancellor. It taught us precision. Once we understood the true cost of unlimited warfare, we developed new approaches. Surgical conflicts, proxy wars, economic warfare, information campaigns, methods designed to achieve victory without triggering total retaliation." Colonel Mitchell manipulated the display to show smaller conflicts that had occurred during and after the nuclear standoff. The casualty numbers were lower, but the tactical efficiency was terrifyingly higher. We learned to end conflicts before they could escalate. We developed diplomatic solutions backed by the implied threat of escalation management. What you witnessed with the Corvani-Zealith conflict, Reed continued, was a refined version of techniques humans developed to avoid destroying ourselves. We don't end wars out of kindness. We end them out of survival instinct. Dr. Hayes stepped forward with additional data displays. The psychological cost of this learning process cannot be understated. Human civilization carries collective trauma from our warfare evolution. Every diplomatic solution we offer is informed by genetic memory of what happens when negotiations fail. This is why, Reed addressed the Council directly, when we analyzed galactic conflicts, we immediately recognized the patterns. Species, locked in comfortable traditional warfare, exactly where humanity was before we learned what warfare actually costs. The hologram now showed projection models comparing current galactic conflicts to human historical patterns. The parallels were unmistakable and terrifying. The 1,000-year war between the Corvani and Zealith, Colonel Mitchell explained, followed exactly the same evolutionary pressure that led to our global wars. Comfortable conflict gradually escalating toward weapons and tactics that would make the war impossible to survive. Chancellor Vrex rose from his throne, his massive form trembling slightly. Are you suggesting that every conflict in galactic history is following this pattern? Reed met the Chancellor's gaze without flinching. We're not suggesting it, Chancellor. We've proved it. Every major conflict in your databases shows the same evolutionary pressure toward total warfare. The only difference is that galactic species haven't yet developed weapons that match their psychological capacity for destruction. Dr. Hayes activated a final display showing technological development curves for various galactic civilizations. But they will, Counselor. Within 2 to 3 generations, current conflicts will produce weapons capable of sterilizing star systems. When that happens, the psychological pressure will make total warfare inevitable. Unless, Reed concluded, we help them understand what they're approaching before they have to learn it through experience. As the day's session ended, the Council sat in contemplative silence. They had asked humans to explain their methods, but what they had received was a glimpse into an evolutionary history that no other species had survived intact. The question now was whether that knowledge made humanity the galaxy's salvation or its greatest threat. The third day brought an unprecedented sight to the Galactic Council chambers. Emperor Krell of the Corvani Empire had requested permission to testify via quantum transmission, and his massive form now materialized in the witness alcove. Standing nearly 4 meters tall with ceremonial battle scars covering his chitinous exoskeleton, Krell commanded respect from every species in the galaxy. Yet as he faced the Council, something in his posture suggested that even he had been shaken by his encounter with human analysis. Chancellor Vrex gestured toward the Emperor with obvious deference. Your Imperial Majesty, the Council is honored by your presence. Please tell us exactly what the humans showed you during their intervention in your conflict with the Zealith Republic. Krell's 4 arms moved in patterns that conveyed deep unease, a response that sent murmurs through the observer galleries. The Emperor of the Corvani was known throughout the galaxy for his unshakable composure. Yet here he stood visibly disturbed by memories of his meeting with the human delegation. Chancellor, honored council members, Krell began, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 years of imperial authority. What the humans showed us was not merely a projection or a theoretical analysis. It was a mathematical prophecy that turned my blood to ice. The Emperor's gaze fell upon Ambassador Reed, who sat with the same calm that had characterized his previous appearances. The human began our meeting by asking me a simple question. Your Majesty, in 1,000 years of war with the Zealith, how many Corvani warriors have you personally lost? Chancellor Vrex leaned forward intently. And your answer, Your Majesty? Krell's breathing apparatus cycled heavily, a sign of emotional stress rarely seen in the Imperial presence. 17,400,612 warriors. I remember every name, every family, every sacrifice made in service to our empire. Reed stood slowly, his movement drawing the attention of every being in the chamber. Permission to address the witness, Chancellor? Frex nodded reluctantly, sensing that whatever Reed was about to reveal would fundamentally change the Council's understanding of the situation. "Your Majesty," Reed said, his voice carrying an odd gentleness that contrasted sharply with the implications of his words. "In the simulation we ran for you, how many Corvani warriors died in the first hour of actual total warfare against the Zealoth Republic?" The Emperor's form seemed to diminish despite his massive size. 23 million, he replied, his voice barely audible through the quantum transmission. A shocked silence filled the chamber. In 1 hour of theoretical warfare, the humans had projected casualties that exceeded a millennium of actual conflict. And in the first day? Reed continued relentlessly. 400 million, Krell whispered. The first week? Krell's voice became barely audible. 2,700,000,000, nearly 30% of our total population. Councillor Thane's ethereal form flickered violently with distress. Impossible. No conflict could produce such casualties. The logistics alone. Reed turned to address the council, his expression grave. Councillor Thane, your species achieved spaceflight through peaceful evolution. You've never experienced total warfare, but humans have. We know exactly what happens when two technological civilizations commit completely to each other's destruction. General, Stone activated a holographic display that filled the chamber with tactical projections, fleet movement patterns, and resource allocation models. The simulation incorporated both empires' actual military capabilities, not the theatrical versions they had been using for 1,000 years. Real fleet deployments, actual weapon efficiency, optimal targeting protocols. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had studied warfare's evolution. The Corvani and Zealoth had been fighting with unconscious limitations. Agreed-upon rules, convenient supply issues, cultural taboos that prevented total engagement. They were using perhaps 5% of their actual destructive potential. We showed them what happened when those limitations disappeared, Reed added. When supply lines operated at full efficiency, when every weapon fired to its maximum capability, when entire star systems became acceptable losses in pursuit of strategic advantage. Emperor Krell's form began to shimmer as emotion affected his quantum transmission. By the end of the first month in their simulation, both our empires would have been reduced to scattered refugee populations hiding in deep space. Our homeworlds, gone. Our colonies, ash. Everything we had built over millennia, erased. The Emperor paused, struggling to maintain his composure. But that wasn't the worst part of their projection. The worst part was the mathematics. The cold, precise calculations showing exactly how we would lose everything we claimed to be fighting for. Chancellor Vrex's mandibles had stopped their nervous clicking entirely. What do you mean, Your Majesty? The humans didn't just show us military projections, Krell explained, his voice gaining strength as he focused on the technical aspects. They showed us economic collapse models, sociological breakdown patterns, psychological trauma cascades affecting civilian populations. They demonstrated that even if one side achieved total victory, the victor would be so damaged that they would collapse within a generation. Reed nodded grimly. Wars don't end when one side wins, Chancellor. They end when the cost of continuing exceeds the value of any possible victory. The Corvani and Zealoth had unconsciously structured their conflict to never reach that point. So we ended it, Krell said simply. Not because we feared death, we are warriors, and death in battle is no stranger to us. We ended it because we finally understood what we were truly risking. Dr. Chen consulted her notes and stepped forward. Both empires redirected their military budgets toward joint infrastructure projects within 6 hours of seeing the simulation. They've already begun establishing shared colonies and research facilities. Joint colonies? Councillor Rain's scales shifted to a deep purple of confusion. Species that have been mortal enemies for 1,000 years. Emperor Krell's form solidified as his resolve strengthened. Former enemies, Councillor. When you truly comprehend the alternative, cooperation becomes not just preferable, it becomes the only rational choice. Reed addressed the council with renewed intensity. Your Honors, this is what humanity offers to the galaxy. Not conquest, not domination, clarity. The ability to see past the performance of conflict to its inevitable conclusions. But there's something else you should know, Emperor Krell added, his voice carrying a weight that made even the most experienced diplomats lean forward. The humans didn't just show us what total war would cost our empires. They showed us what it would cost the galaxy. Chancellor Vrex's compound eyes reflected sudden understanding and fear. What do you mean? They demonstrated cascade failure patterns, Krell explained. How the collapse of our two empires would destabilize trade routes, trigger refugee crises, and cause economic disruption that would eventually engulf every civilization in the galaxy. Reed's expression grew darker. Chancellor, the Corvani-Zelith conflict wasn't just a regional war. It was a systemic weakness that would have brought down galactic civilization within 50 years. And now? Vrex asked quietly. Emperor Krell's transmission began to fade as his allotted time expired. But his final words carried clearly through the chamber. Now, Chancellor, the galaxy has time to learn from our experience rather than repeat it. As the Emperor's form disappeared, the Council sat in contemplative silence. They had heard testimony about humanity's methods, but what they had really learned was that the galaxy's comfortable assumptions about warfare were not just wrong. They were potentially fatal. Tomorrow would bring testimony from the Zelith Republic, and the Council was beginning to understand that each day of these proceedings was revealing layers of galactic vulnerability that no one had previously imagined. The fourth day brought an atmosphere of dread to the Galactic Council chambers that seemed to press against the very walls. Council members who had maintained their composure for 3 days now showed visible signs of strain. Chancellor Vrex's mandibles clicked in irregular patterns, while Councillor Thane's ethereal form flickered with unstable energy signatures. Word had spread through the diplomatic quarters that today's testimony would reveal the full scope of human understanding of warfare. And even species known for their warrior traditions had grown uneasy. Emperor Zane of the Zelith Republic entered the chamber not through quantum transmission, but in person. Her crystalline exoskeleton caught and refracted the chamber's light into prismatic patterns that seemed to shift with her emotions. Unlike the ceremonial approach that had characterized previous testimonies, Zane moved with the fluid grace of a predator, her multiple arms gesturing in complex patterns that conveyed urgency to anyone familiar with Zelith body language. Honorable Council, she began without waiting for formal introduction. I come not merely to testify, but to warn you. What the humans showed my empire and the Corvani was not simply the end of our conflict. It was a glimpse into an abyss that awaits this galaxy if their methods are rejected or misunderstood, Chancellor. Vrex's compound eyes reflected confusion mixed with growing alarm. Your Majesty, surely you don't suggest that ending your 1,000-year conflict was somehow dangerous to galactic stability? Zane's crystalline features hardened, her light patterns shifting to deep reds and violets that indicated fear among her species. I suggest, Chancellor, that the humans possess a form of intelligence that makes them the most dangerous species any of us have ever encountered. Not because of their weapons or their technology, but because of their absolute comprehension of consequence. Ambassador Reed remained seated, but Dr. Warren stood and activated a holographic display that materialized in the chamber's center. Your Majesty, would you prefer to explain the secondary projections to the Council, or shall we demonstrate them directly? I will explain, Zane replied sharply, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen the implications firsthand. The Council must understand the full scope of what they're dealing with. The Emperor moved to the center of the chamber, her movements creating mesmerizing light patterns that drew the attention of every representative. The humans didn't just show us what would happen if the Corvani Empire and Zelith Republic fought to completion. They showed us what would happen to the entire galaxy if any major powers fought to completion. Councillor Thane's ethereal form flickered with alarm. What do you mean, Your Majesty? I mean, Zane continued, that every major conflict in galactic history has been unconsciously limited by the same psychological barriers that governed our war with the Corvani. Species develop comfortable patterns of violence, acceptable losses, manageable destruction, survivable hatred. Reed finally stood, his expression darker than it had been in previous days. But those limitations aren't natural laws, Councillor Thane. They're choices. Unconscious choices made by civilizations that have never faced existential pressure, and choices can be reconsidered. Dr. Warren manipulated the hologram, showing galactic trade routes, alliance networks, and resource dependencies in a complex web that connected every major civilization. We ran projections for every significant power block in the galaxy, The hegemony versus the Outer Rim Coalition. The technical alliance against the biosynthesis cooperative. The sacred worlds facing the industrial collective. General Stone's voice carried grim authority as he stepped forward. Every scenario, without exception, resulted in galactic civilization collapse within 2 years. Not just the combatants, everyone. Emperor Zane's light pattern shifted to deep reds and violets as she continued. They showed us the cascade effects, Counselor. How trade disruption leads to resource wars. How refugee crises destabilize neutral systems. How the breakdown of interstellar communication networks triggers technological regression. But surely, Chancellor Vrex protested, his mandibles clicking rapidly. The Council's peacekeeping protocols would prevent such escalation. Your protocols, Reed interrupted, are designed to manage traditional conflicts. Conflicts where the participants unconsciously limit their own destructive potential. Your peacekeeping assumes that species will choose survival over victory when pressed to the brink. An assumption, Zane added ominously, that our simulation proved false under sufficient pressure. Dr. Chen stepped forward with additional data displays, showing psychological analysis models. We analyzed breaking points for every major species in the galaxy. The conditions under which rational self-preservation gives way to what humans call exterminatory impulse. Every civilization has that threshold. Even humans? Counselor Rain asked, his scales shifting to pale yellow with fear. Reed's pause lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough to be noticed by every being in the chamber. Especially humans, Counselor. We've crossed that threshold before. Multiple times. The silence that followed was profound. Even the constant background hum of the chamber's technology seemed muted by the weight of Reed's admission. Emperor Zane continued relentlessly, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who had seen the mathematical certainty of galactic destruction. The humans demonstrated that they could trigger total warfare between any 2 civilizations simply by removing the unconscious limitations that keep conflicts manageable. They showed us exactly how to fight without mercy, without restraint, without any consideration except absolute victory. And then, Reed added quietly, they showed us what such knowledge looks like when possessed by a species that evolved through millions of years of exactly that kind of warfare. The holographic display now showed theoretical scenarios of human warfare using current galactic technology. The projections that appeared defied comprehension. Planetary populations measured in casualties per hour. Star systems rendered uninhabitable as tactical necessities. Entire sectors of space evacuated to create strategic barriers. Chancellor Vrex had stopped his nervous clicking entirely. When he spoke, his voice carried a tremor that had not been present in previous sessions. Are you threatening this council, Ambassador Reed? No, Chancellor, Reed replied with terrifying calm. We're explaining why the galaxy needs us to exist. Because we're the only species that truly understands the alternative to the current system. Emperor Zane's form pulsed with urgent light patterns as she addressed the council directly. The humans didn't just end our war with the Corvani. They revealed that every conflict in galactic history has been mere performance compared to what's possible. They possess the knowledge to turn any disagreement into an extinction event. And more importantly, they possess the wisdom to prevent such escalation. Dr. Warren deactivated the holographic display, returning the chamber to normal lighting. The transition seemed to physically relieve the council members, as if the projections themselves had been pressing against their consciousness. The choice before this council, Reed continued, isn't whether to accept humanity's methods for ending conflicts. The choice is whether you want the galaxy's only true experts in warfare to be your allies in preventing such knowledge from spreading, or to discover what we learned during our own species' most violent evolutionary period. As the day's session prepared to end, Reed addressed the council one final time. Tomorrow, Your Honors, we'll present our final proposal, a framework for ensuring that no species in this galaxy ever has to learn what humanity learned about the true nature of warfare. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Chancellor Vrex called out, Ambassador Reed, this knowledge you possess, the ability to calculate such destruction, it doesn't concern you? Reed paused at the chamber's exit, looking back at the council with an expression that was equal parts grim determination and haunted memory. Every day, Chancellor, but our concern isn't what we might do with such knowledge. Our concern is what happens to the galaxy if we're not here to prevent others from learning it the way we did. Emperor Zane remained in the chamber as the humans departed, her crystalline form reflecting the council's troubled expressions. "Honorable Council," she said softly, "pray that tomorrow's proposal doesn't change your minds about wanting these humans as allies. Because after what I've seen of their capabilities, I would rather face any enemy in the galaxy than face them." The fifth and final day brought an unprecedented sight to the Galactic Council chambers. Every council member was present, along with representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. The observer galleries were packed beyond their designed capacity, with millions more watching through quantum feeds across thousands of worlds. The weight of galactic history seemed to press down on the chamber as beings who had never before agreed on anything waited to hear humanity's final proposal. Ambassador Reed entered the chamber with his team, but this time he carried only a single unremarkable datapad. No holographic projectors, no elaborate displays, no complex presentations. Just one human and the accumulated weight of his species' bloodiest lessons, distilled into a proposal that would either secure humanity's place in galactic civilization or mark the beginning of something far more dangerous. Chancellor Vrex rose as the humans took their positions, his massive form trembling slightly with what observers recognized as either anticipation or dread. "Ambassador Reed, before you present your final proposal, this council has one remaining question." "Of course, Chancellor," Reed replied, setting down his datapad and clasping his hands behind his back in the gesture that had become familiar. "Over 5 days of testimony. In 4 days of testimony, you've demonstrated that humans possess unparalleled knowledge of warfare and its consequences. You've shown us projections that suggest conflict resolution through threatened escalation. And you've revealed capabilities that frankly terrify species who thought they understood violence. What you haven't shown us is why we should trust you with such power." The chamber fell silent. This was the question every being in the galaxy had been waiting to hear answered. The fundamental issue that would determine whether humanity's revelation led to cooperation or to the kind of preemptive action that species take when they encounter an existential threat. Reed's response surprised everyone in the chamber. "Chancellor Vrex, members of the council, representatives of the galaxy, you shouldn't trust us." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the chamber, quickly suppressed as beings strained to hear Reed's explanation. "In fact," Reed continued, "the last thing you should do is trust any species that possesses the knowledge we've demonstrated. Trust implies faith in another's good intentions, and good intentions can change. What we're offering is something far more reliable than trust." Dr. Warren activated a simple holographic display, not the complex simulations they had used in previous days, but a basic organizational chart showing interconnected networks linking Earth to every major civilization in the galaxy. "We're offering mutual dependence," Reed explained. "A galactic conflict resolution framework where human survival depends entirely on galactic stability, and galactic stability depends entirely on human expertise." The hologram showed trade routes, research partnerships, cultural exchanges, and resource dependencies that would make Earth's isolation impossible and its destruction economically catastrophic for the entire galaxy. "The framework has 3 components," Dr. Chen announced, stepping forward with the confidence of someone presenting a solution rather than a threat. "First, the Threat Assessment Division, human teams embedded with major A civilizations to identify potential conflicts before they develop traditional military momentum." General Stone moved to the holographic display. "Second, the Escalation Prevention Corps, joint human-alien units trained in conflict de-escalation using human tactical knowledge combined with species-specific psychological insights. And third," Reed concluded, "the Mutual Survival Protocol, binding agreements that make human extinction synonymous with galactic collapse, and galactic collapse synonymous with human extinction." Chancellor Vrex's mandibles clicked thoughtfully as he processed the implications. "You're proposing to make yourselves indispensable to galactic civilization." "We're proposing to make ourselves accountable," Reed corrected. "Under this framework, if humans ever use our knowledge for conquest rather than prevention, we trigger the same cascading failures that would destroy the civilizations we're meant to protect." At that moment, Emperor Krell materialized via quantum transmission, his massive form filling the witness alcove. "The Corvani Empire supports this proposal unconditionally. We have seen the alternative." Emperor Zane's crystalline form appeared moments later, her light patterns showing determination. The Zealoth Republic agrees. The humans have already demonstrated their value to galactic stability. Counselor Thane's ethereal form solidified with renewed energy. But how do we know this isn't elaborate manipulation? A way for humans to achieve dominance through apparent service? Reed smiled, genuinely this time without the cold edge that had characterized his previous expressions. Counselor Thane, that's exactly the kind of suspicious thinking we're counting on. The framework only works if every species remains vigilant, questioning our methods, demanding accountability. Dr. Warren adjusted the hologram to show oversight mechanisms, review processes, and fail-safe protocols. Every human team operates under joint command. Every assessment is verified by multiple species. Every intervention requires council approval. Most importantly, Reed added, every human involved in the program has family, friends, and communities on Earth. Communities that depend on galactic stability for their survival. We can't betray the galaxy without betraying ourselves. Chancellor Vrex leaned back in his seat, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's light as he considered the proposal. And if a conflict arises that can't be resolved through your methods? Reed's expression grew serious again. Then we help all parties understand exactly what they're choosing to lose. We remove the comfortable illusions that make warfare seem manageable. We ensure that every decision to continue fighting is made with full knowledge of its consequences. General Stone's voice carried absolute conviction. In our experience, Chancellor, wars continue because participants don't truly understand what they're risking. Once they do, rational self-interest almost always prevails. Almost always? Counselor Rain pressed, his scales shifting with nervous energy. Reed paused, the weight of unspoken implications filling the chamber. Sometimes, Counselor, rational self-interest fails. Sometimes species choose destruction over compromise. In those cases, he looked directly at the council, his gaze encompassing every representative in the chamber. In those cases, we help the galaxy protect itself from the consequences of that choice. The chamber remained silent for long moments as the full meaning of Reed's words settled over the assembled representatives. They were being offered not just conflict resolution, but insurance against the kind of civilizational suicide that humanity had narrowly avoided. Finally, Chancellor Vrex called for the formal vote. All in favor of accepting humanity's proposal for a galactic conflict resolution framework? The response was unanimous. Every council member, every imperial representative, every observer who was entitled to vote supported the proposal. The sound of agreement in dozens of languages created a harmonious cacophony that echoed through the chamber. As cheers erupted from the observer galleries and quantum feeds carried the news across the galaxy, Reed felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had carried since Earth first learned it was not alone in the universe. Humanity had found its place among the stars, not as conquerors or subjects, but as guardians of the peace they had learned to preserve through bitter necessity. Later, as the human delegation prepared to leave the council chambers for the final time, Dr. Warren approached Reed with a question that had been weighing on her mind. Thomas, do you think they understand what they've really agreed to? Reed looked back at the council members, who were already deep in discussion about implementation details and framework specifics. Dr. Warren, I think they understand exactly what they need to understand. That sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is also the most necessary. And what about us? She asked quietly. Do we understand what we've committed ourselves to? Reed smiled as he watched alien species that had been enemies for millennia beginning to plan joint ventures with human oversight. We've committed to being the galaxy's insurance policy against its own destructive impulses. Considering our history, Dr. Warren, I can't think of a more human responsibility. As the delegation left the chamber and began the journey back to Earth, news of the day's decision spread across the galaxy at faster-than-light speed. The age of traditional warfare was ending, replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization built not on conquest or diplomacy alone, but on the hard-earned wisdom that some victories are too expensive to survive. Humanity had found its purpose among the stars, not to fight wars, but to ensure they never truly began. And across the galaxy, for the first time in recorded history, the sound of weapons being powered down could be heard on 1,000 worlds as civilizations chose cooperation over the comfortable familiarity of eternal conflict.